So in the previous videos I said once we went over these muscles I would layer over the trapezius and the latissimus. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I had a thought that this might make more sense if I throw in the neck first, and what I'm going to do, rather than making a individual or a set of individual muscles for the neck, I'm going to just conceive of this as a cylinder that leans forwards, which is how I think you should think of the neck. Problem is this is going to give us parallel lines, which we'll have to look to break later, right? That front line and the back line through there. But for now, this will work okay. Now, what I need to do is to go to my spine and check that that is really diving nice and far into my neck. So I can probably pull this forward a little bit more. Now, if we had a head on here, what we would find is that where that spine is plugging in is right in the middle of the head. It's a sensible place, right? If you're thinking, if you're going to hold the weight of anything up, probably put your support in the middle of it. Much easier than having it, like a lot of people will think of the spine as being like right at the back. Well, then you've got all this heavy weight of the head to carry from, from this point so far away from the middle. So bury that in the middle, and good things will happen. That's also, by the way, going to be where the back of your jaw is, more or less, and the front of your ear. So chop the head in half, and it's, yeah, a lot of good things you can get from that. Now, with the neck, what I would do is you take your cylinder like this, right, and then chop it diagonally like that. And that's going to give you your sternocleidomastoid muscle and the plane change at the back. So through here, I'm chopping out just in front of that, where I marked in that triangle before. This starts to scoop out our sternocleidomastoid, but as well, I'm leaving a cylinder in here. And this is the cylinder of the trachea, which is pretty much always going to lean forwards, by the way. Super long at the moment, so I'll shorten that. And do you know what? Let's give him a little bit of a chin. Okay, so this is like the underneath of his jaw, let's say. So yeah, your trachea is always going to have this forwards angle, and even when you look up, you don't want to bend that, because as soon as that bends, the air stops flowing through. When the air stops flowing through your trachea, you'll die. So what you find is that the body is engineered in such a way as to reduce the chances of you dying by as much as it can. So that trachea is a pretty solid unit that whichever direction you look is going to be leaning forwards. And you can just think of it as a cylinder, and that'll give you most of the way there. You can go in a little bit more depth if you want to, and on a male at least, find this cartilage here that this can really jump out, right? This would be the Adam's apple, and can be something like a V shape from the front. This is cartilage, so you want to make it nice and sharp. And women have it as well, it's just much more defined in men. This is the thyroid cartilage. And then underneath that you have a little bit more. This is the cricoid cartilage. What's interesting is that is more developed in women, and this, you get this kind of oval bulge down there that you see much more of in a female than you would in the male. So that relationship between those two movements, you can pretty much just invert that. Okay, so let's spin back here. We have that triangle. We're digging out behind that. And that's going to leave us with our trapezius, more or less. So what I want you to bear in mind about this area of the trapezius is how thin it is, and the fact that it's nowhere near giving us the silhouette of the neck. It will give us a silhouette of the neck here, but not here. So this is going to be, this will be sternocleidomastoid, or it'll be levator scapulae. Let's look at those in turn. So we'll start with sternocleidomastoid. Sterno going to the sternum, right? So we have this, the muscle is made up of two parts. One that goes to the sternum, so this keeps on going down, not going to the clavicle. Loads of people have it going to the clavicle, but no, it goes right the way down here, goes to the sternum. Sternocleidomastoid, The clido portion refers to the clavicle, so what you have is you have a secondary portion, secondary part of the muscle that is flat, and that's grabbing hold of that section of the clavicle through there. Mastoid is the mastoid process just behind the ear. So we don't have an ear, but trust me, it's going to be there. So if I define this very strongly, there's sternocleidomastoid. Look at how nice and round this muscle is. For some reason, everyone has a tendency to make this like really flat and sharp and thin. I don't know why. I think it's maybe because we see that tendon really often, and that's a pretty sharp and thin tendon. So it might be that that's throwing off our conception of the muscle. But as we get into the muscle belly from here, it's really, really rounded. Look at how this has been dealt with historically in art, because it's such an important muscle, and oftentimes that roundedness is really exaggerated. And then you have the second portion of it that isn't so rounded, that's back here. They're both coming from the mastoid process, but this is the clavicular portion. So this is really flat, going to the clavicle there. And this little bit of tendon is quite visible in life. But what I find a lot of the time is people think that it's like pointing in there. So it gives you an M shape like that. But no, it's pointing right to the mastoid process. So that does give you an M shape, but it's a much taller M. So that's a nice way of thinking about the sternocleidomastoid portion from the front. From the side, you basically take that cylinder of the neck, chop it in half, and just make sure that you pay attention and give some love to the meatiness of it. Okay, now Levator Scapulae, not such an important muscle, but still, like there are so many muscles we could look at on the neck. We could look at all of these ones that lift the trachea up and down, yeah, help. We've got this floating bone in here, this hyoid bone, and so we have a lot of muscles that move that, and that's attached to the trachea on one side, the tongue on the other side. We'll look at more of that when we're looking at the face. For now, I'm just going to say, let's consider the neck as two muscles, right, other than the trapezius, which I'm going to look at separately. So I'm going to look at the sternocleidomastoid and levator scapulae. So levator scapulae, let's see if there's another one of these muscles that I can steal. Yeah, why not? So we're going to use this multifidus mass, because the levator scapulae is pretty much a rounded, sausagey sort of muscle. And it's coming from the top 4 or 5 vertebrae of the spine. So you want to point it towards the top of the spine through here, and then it's grabbing hold of this. I can grab hold of my scapula. That inside border there, the scapula. So pull this back. This tells me that my rhomboids are way too high. Rhomboids aren't grabbing hold of that. Of that top triangle there. So that was just a little test to see if anyone caught that. And instead, so they're going to be going to C7, which should be there. Okay, so maybe my scapulas will need to come up a little bit. So much easier to figure out once you actually start putting skin and flesh on there. For the time being, let's just keep on winging it and say, okay, this is my levator scapulae muscle, grabbing hold of that inside top triangle of the scapula, something like that. And so even though this muscle isn't, and I'm just thinning it out, even though this muscle isn't impacting the form directly, it's pushing out the trapezius, so it's giving us a bunch of form to the neck. And in this area here, we can often see it in life. Not always. It's nowhere near as important as the sternocleidomastoid, but it is certainly a muscle that you can find. And you can look at this and the sternocleidomastoid as giving you together like an inverted V shape, right? Up there, down there, together that's giving you that upside down V. And take a look for that, because at this portion here, it's not covered by any other muscle, right? At some point, it starts to dive underneath the trapezius muscle, and so then we're less likely to see it, right? Here it'll be diving underneath the trapezius like that, but in this area there, keep an eye out for it. It's less of a young person's muscle, I would say, because what happens is the skin around here tends to be fairly firm and fairly tight, and that hides some of those forms. But in an older person, when the skin is loose, especially here where it's on an up plane, is gravity is going to push the skin down, and it's going to really start to define those forms. So that muscle will start to pop out. So I think it's an old person muscle, and also like a thin person muscle. I feel like you see quite a lot in thin people. Yeah, so I mean that's really your neck, right? So we're taking a cylinder, we're leaning it forwards, we're taking that line across it, right, which will ultimately give us our sternocleidomastoid, but we're going to find that by chopping out in front, chopping out behind. When we chop out in front and behind, we'll leave like a cylinder, both at the front and the back. At the front, it's going to give us our trachea. At the back, it's going to give us our trapezius, which I will look at in the next video. And then find the fullness of our sternocleidomastoid, add in the levator scapulae, and then we're pretty good, you know. And already having found the levator scapulae, you can see that what I'm starting to do is to break, you know, by having a cylinder as our mass conception there, I was like, okay, we've got a danger there, right? That maybe we're going to make the front and the back line identical, but you can see what's going to happen as I push out there, and as we put trapezius over the top there, is that straight line is going to start to push outwards. So we're going to have one straight line and a broken line down the back. So we're nearly there. We're nearly there. Just trapezius, latissimus, and then that's it. Then that's everything for the torso.